Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and today I'm going to be talking about radical acceptance. And I chose this topic because I'm just coming off of Burning Man, which some of you may have heard me talk about before. And one of the things you realize when you go to Burning Man, which is this, I guess, a festival gathering about 70 or 80,000 people in the middle of a desert in Nevada, is that it's pretty harsh out there. Very high temperatures, lots of dust storms, and you're subject to the circumstances that you find yourself in. And so you just have to accept and radically accept that, yeah, you're in the middle of this desert and there's a huge dust storm, the visibility is zero, and you're going to have a great time because you've been looking forward to this for so long. So I wanted to talk about radical acceptance because I think it's such an important part of leadership. Because to what extent we accept what is going on, that we can see the reality of what is going on around us, to be aware, and to not fight the reality, but to be truly aware and accept the reality of what we are in, then we can actually take the steps to take action. But being very clear about what you control and what you don't control is a key part of leadership. And especially for people who want to create exponential, disruptive change. Knowing what you can change and what you can't is a key part of your leadership strategy. So one of the things that's really hard for us to do is to understand what we can control and not. There are a couple things that what I call the fallacies of leadership. And one of the biggest ones, something that I've been writing about now for over a decade, is the fallacy of control. And the idea here is that we think that when we become a leader, when we're an entrepreneur starting a business, I mean, people would say to me, isn't it great to start your own business because you're in so much control of your destiny? And for those of you who are in leadership positions or have started your own company, you realize how out of control you are, how little control you have over the circumstances of what's there. And so this fallacy, this illusion of being in control is one of the most important things that we have to give up as leaders in order to be effective. And the way I think about this is that you realize the only thing you can really control, you can't control the outcomes of your strategies. You can't even control the people who work for you because you really don't push buttons to get people to do work. You're actually understanding and inspiring them, encouraging them to align with the objectives that you're created for yourself and for the organization. So a really important thing is letting go of the need to be in control, letting go of the need for certainty, because when you want things to be certain and things don't go your way, then it leads to a lot of anxiety. There's a saying that we use at Burning Man called plan your burn and then burn your plan. Because whatever you planned is probably not going to be the thing that you are going to get. And so I also like this saying that when men make plans, God laughs. And so the reality is certainty is definitely something that you can't plan on. And two other illusions and fallacies we hang on to oftentimes as leaders is that there's security and that there's permanence. Security meaning that everything is going to be here still, that we cling to a sense of security in order to see our existence in the world. And one of my favorite stories that come out of the Old Testament in the Bible is the story of Job. Job, you may recall, was a very wealthy man in terms of riches and his family and his community, and he lost it all, including his health. And in the end, he still stayed very positive and trusted God. Was he in radical acceptance? Was he in surrender of his circumstances? Absolutely. And nothing could faze him from the realities. He could see the fact that he had lost everything, but he still felt like he was grateful and happy and secure even when he had nothing. I've always been touched by that because he realized that nothing was permanent, nothing was secure, he had no control. And in the end, he was still very comfortable with where he was in the world. And so this whole idea of radical acceptance, this idea that you can welcome anything coming at your way, no matter what happens, good, bad. And then be able to look at it with no judgment, with no anxiety, is a really interesting concept for leaders. Because if we can do that, then we can look at the situation without the emotional baggage, without disappointment, without judgment. And we can then assess what are the things that we can do in order to move forward. So I wanted to just put that out as a beginning. I'm going to check the comments here to see if anybody has any comments here. We have Sanjay who says, control is a mechanism that works when we have positive attitude, empathy, and purpose to be there. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for that. I think that's a great point to make, in that when we're thinking about control as something that you can positively do to take action in a certain circumstance, then that becomes something that you can do proactively rather than passively. So let me go into this whole idea of radical acceptance in a little bit more detail. So radical acceptance, there's many definitions out there, and it's basically to accept the ability to accept situations that are outside of your control without judging, which in turn reduces the suffering that is caused by them. And the key word here is suffering, because if you are in a situation where things are just coming at you and you realize that regardless of whatever thing you do, there's nothing you can do to change that situation, then you can remove any judgment, any emotion, any reaction to that. It's like the weather. The weather's bad. Is there anything you could do about the weather? No. Can you accept that the weather is bad? It's raining on a beautiful picnic that you may have planned? Yeah, you can accept that, because there's nothing you can do about that. Then you can decide what action you want to take. Do we move it indoors? Do we set up a tent? Do we cancel it? These are actions that you can then proactively take. But if you instead resign to trying to control the weather, which is really hard to do, it's impossible, or you fall into resignation where you do nothing about it, and you get sad and you get disappointed and frustrated, it doesn't help the situation. So for leadership, from a leadership perspective, acceptance is the very first step to change. Because when you can accept the circumstances, see the reality of what's going on, then you can decide what to do next. There's a saying I'd like to talk to people about. Do you believe what you see, or do you see what you want to believe? Do you believe what you see? Here's a reality. Or do you see what you believe? If we see what we believe, then you're not seeing the reality. It's denial. It's not facing the realities. And that can get you into a lot of trouble, because as a leader, if you can't face the reality, if you cannot accept the radical situation that you are in, then you'll never be able to make the right decision. But if you believe what you see and can see clearly, then you can actually make the right decisions. So this is the reason I want to do this is that oftentimes when I work with leaders and with my clients, I'm coming in and seeing a situation that it's clearly in front of them, but they refuse to accept it. They instead want to believe the reality that they had painted for themselves of control, of certainty, of permanence, of security, because it's so difficult to accept this different reality than what they wanted. They saw themselves as leaders of industry, as being in command, and having to accept a different circumstance than what they expected was an erosion of their identity and of self as a leader. And yet at the most important point, this is when you as a leader needs to step up and say, it didn't work out the way we wanted to, and we're going to have to accept that. Now, what are we going to do about this? And a lot of this comes down to this idea that's really hard to understand, and that is the idea of surrender. A year ago, I went on a meditation retreat, and one of the things I really struggled with was this whole idea of surrender. And the whole retreat was really around, how do you surrender yourself to your circumstance? And I was sitting there in the middle of the room shaking my head going, I don't do surrender. I have seen myself as a capable leader, somebody who can make things happen. I do not do surrender. And yet here at that moment, I really had to understand that surrender was not a weakness, but is actually a strength. And that is, it is counter to every single fiber in me as a person, in my identity as a leader, as an entrepreneur, that, you're goal oriented, you're driven to peak performances. You just don't give up. Failure is not an option, right? But at certain times, you have to realize that surrender is absolutely needed, because you have to surrender to the circumstances. You have to accept that things are not the way that you would want them to be. And the sooner you can surrender to that and accept what is going on, the sooner you can then take action. So I had to look at it differently, because if I couldn't see the possibilities of what was in front of me, as long as I was clinging to my view of what the world was going to be, and because I was clinging to that old view of what I wanted the world to be, no matter how much I would will it, it was not that way. As long as I clung to that, then I couldn't see the other options. And so this is really hard for me to understand. And a key part of my learning and my journey as a leader was learning this idea of surrender in particular radical acceptance. So just to give you an idea, one of the things that happened at Burning Man was a huge dust storm came in and pretty much was covering the entire environment in the event in zero visibility. Basically, you couldn't see literally even 3 feet in front of you. And I said, I could sit here in my air-conditioned RV and wait this out. And it was maybe going to be 5 minutes. It may have been 5 hours. Or I could actually venture forth and go see my friends. And my logic here was, there's nothing I can do about the dust storm. And most likely, my friends are all hunkering down in their tents and RVs. So this would be a great time to go find them and visit them, because they're probably going to be at home. So I ventured off into the whiteout, stumbled my way slowly but certainly into the dust storm to go find my friends, knocked on their tents and their doors, and had great conversations with people who I would most likely not be able to catch up with, because it's such a big and crazy event. And so one of the things that I realized is that surrender is actually a choice. It's a practice. And the more you can practice this, every time that you surrender, you become a bit more free of any of the self-inflicted pain, loss of expectations, and anxieties. So one of the things that is so important is to think about surrender as an active coping mechanism rather than as a weakness. So a couple things I do want to talk a little bit about is one of the best, most interesting books I've read around this is a book by Michael Singer called The Surrender Experiment, where you're participating in your world by surrendering. It's an active way of dealing with and understanding the world. So if you want to dig more into that, that's a great book to be taking a look at. Fascinating experience of Michael Singer, who started as basically a spiritual mindfulness and meditation guru, became a carpenter, became a computer programmer, and an entrepreneur and a leader of hundreds of millions of dollars in business. So fantastic biography about him and his journey and how surrendering really helped him build this incredible career. So one of the things that I do want to point out, though, that there are certain circumstances where radical acceptance is not good. And that is, in particular, when you are not taking action when the situation could be different. And I'm thinking about bad jobs, abusive bosses, abusive relationships, where you may be falling into a world of acceptance, of resignation, believing that there's nothing you can do, but there are things that you can do, even though they may be very difficult. And so this is one of the reasons why I've asked this question. In particular, how do you identify what you can control and what you can't? And knowing what you can control, knowing the situations when you can make a difference, and understanding when you can't is a key part of leadership for yourself and also for your organization and teams. If there is a situation where the strategy and everything may be dictated to you, how much of that can you influence and control? How much of it do you really have to accept? And knowing what you can control and what you can't, I think, again, as part of the serenity prayer. God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. What I'm talking about here is the wisdom as a leader to be able to understand what the difference is between what you can control and what you can't. When you have to accept things, radical acceptance and surrender, and when you can't. So just to close out the discussion for today, there are just a few things I wanted to put out there to say this is how you can practice radical acceptance. The first one is to notice when you're resisting reality, and to reframe acceptance maybe as acknowledgement that here's a circumstance, there's nothing we can do about that. And one of the best ways to do that is to encourage people around you to give you feedback, to have trusted advisors who can call you on times when you're not facing reality. If you're not constantly taking the time to check and say, am I seeing actually what's happening out there? Do I believe what I see? Or am I seeing what I'm believing? And taking the time to set those expectations, to check in and saying, am I truly, truly seeing things as they are? I talk to so many CEOs and they say the hardest thing for them is to understand what is real and what is not, what is the truth and what isn't. And they're oftentimes second guessing themselves. Is this really what's going on? Or is it the fact that I want things to be going on this way? And so having those checks, those reality checks, and the practice to be able to accept and surrender to your circumstances is a really important thing to practice on a regular basis in all aspects of your life and leadership. So the first thing is to notice when you're resisting reality. When the reality is sitting there and you're just feeling like, no, I'm in denial, I'm feeling anxious about this, then slow down and figure out what's really going on here, what's reality and what's not. And the second thing is then once you figure out what's reality, understand what you can control and what you can't. And it seems sort of obvious. Of course you would know what you can control or not, but it may not be. And you may underestimate what you can control, or you may be overestimating what you can control. I was speaking to a friend, an entrepreneur, who more than anything else wants his business to succeed. But he's having to face the reality that even though people really like him personally, really think that he has tremendous skills and aptitude as an entrepreneur, they're not investing in his company, not investing in the idea. And so he has to face the reality that maybe there's something about the business plan, maybe there's something about the way he's approaching and pitching the business that just isn't working. And so despite his desires for things to be differently, he has to face that reality. And now it has to make a decision of what of the things that he has under his control that he can change or not, especially around his business plan and his business model. So the first thing, notice when you're resisting reality, is the reality really there? Second thing, what can you control? What can't you control? And the third thing, especially as a leader, setting realistic boundaries and expectations. Because this is in particular, in terms of working with other people, it's very unique to leadership. As a leader, oftentimes what you're saying to people, like, let's head for this direction. Here's our strategy, what we will do, what we won't do. And then clearly defining for everybody what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. And that's setting boundaries and expectations. And the reason why this is important is that in the end, you can't control what people are going to do. They are either going to respect those boundaries, so we're going to meet those expectations or not. So the only thing you can do is set your boundaries and expectations and then watch and see what happens. The only thing you can do is inspire people, hopefully describe the vision you wanted us to go in, everyone to go in, and then hopefully they'll be inspired to follow you. You can't actually control anything. So set the odds in your favor as a leader and be really clear about the expectations and boundaries you're setting. And then check if you're being reasonable or if you're being micromanaging things, again, trying to control things. This is the test of leadership that I oftentimes find that people have to understand. It's not enough just to say, go do this. Well, under what parameters? Under what circumstances? What are the nuances of what you're asking people to do? And having, again, very clear expectations and boundaries are the things that you can control. Whether it actually happens or not is out of your control, but at least stack the odds in your favor. So that's what I have for today. I wanted to just say a couple other things here. Let's see. We have a couple other comments. I just want to see here. We have Mahesh. Hi, Mahesh. Good to see you. If you take away judgment, you let go of so much emotional reaction. So thank you, Mahesh, for that. And it's so good to hear from you, my friend. Judgment is such an important part here because you may have seen from my stream a few weeks ago around mindfulness. It's when you're removing yourself and from that judging, that constant little judge that's in the back of your head, speaking to you and saying, "Hey, you didn't measure up. You didn't do enough here. You could have done more." You get anxious about what you can do in the future, and you're not necessarily being present and focused on what other things that you can do. So when you can remove that judgment, remove the emotion and the reaction to what's happening in front of you, then you can take a breath. You can look and see what's really going on. Be completely present. Be mindful of what's happening. Be aware so that you can take the action. So thank you for Mahesh for reinforcing that. Marissa has this great comment here. The adage of the horse drinking when led to water comes to mind. This is such a great point. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can lead your team towards the right direction. You can point them here, but in the end, they have to decide to take the action that's needed. And the great leaders are the ones who have figured out how to do this. And I have a long comment here from Jay. We're also seeing well-known companies assert control over workers' efforts to take agency. Starbucks, for example, Pepsi, McKinsey. And the thing is that I think, again, how much of this can you control or not? If people are going to unionize, if people are going to have collective action, to what extent can you keep them from doing that versus acknowledging they want to have this, understanding where this need is coming from, and then addressing that particular need directly, head on, in a forthcoming way. One of my favorite examples of companies that do really well with unions is Southwest Airlines. They have one of the strongest unions in the airline industry, and yet, and also the most highly paid, but arguably, up until the times of COVID, the most profitable airline out there. And so one of the things that I think Southwest Airlines has done a really good job of is understanding what they can control and what they can't, especially when it comes to their employees. And for those of you who have ever flown Southwest Airlines, you can really tell people love their job. They bring this joy and this sort of fun aspect and love to their workplace. And it was instilled by the founder to make sure that the culture really directed people in that right direction. And so despite of, or even because of the fact that Southwest Airlines accepts that the union has a right to exist, accepts that the union is going to be a vital part of the organization and is going to work side by side with them to make sure that things are aligned in terms of the organization's long-term viability and also the union's well-being. So those are some just initial thoughts there. Some other quick examples here, comments from Sanjay. Controlling others requires power, while controlling self requires commitment and positive approach. Meditation helps me in ensuring automatic self-control, the behavior most of the times. And I love this because controlling others and controlling yourself is a very different, these are two very different things. And we'll talk about power some other time, but I've talked about it and I've always been interested in how you accumulate and then use power. And power is not necessarily making someone do it. Power is about influence. It's not about control. Power is about, can you have the social capital that you pay it forward and then you're calling it back in to encourage people to show up and participate in the way that you want them to. So we've seen this happen all the time. I am constantly doing things out of a sense of obligation to people who have done things for me. Of course, they've done things for me in the past. They paid it forward. I'm going to come to them and help them when they have a time of need. That's power, influence, whatever way you call it. And leadership is all about the accumulation and the use of power and influence. So great point about that. It's not actually about control. Marissa says, we can't control how others think, but we can control how we react and work to redirect the general flow. Those are great words, Marissa, because the only thing we can control in the end is ourselves and our reactions to the circumstances that we're in, which is why, again, radical acceptance and surrender are such a key part of leadership. And I think Jay just said, yeah, Southwest Airlines is a great example. Love the company. I just love working with them, love watching them, see how they operate. Again, just one of the best models of leadership and stewardship, I think, out there. So that's what I have to share today. I encourage you to think about how you can bring radical acceptance into your daily life, bring surrender into your life every single day. And I say this with, again, this pain of remembering how hard it was for me to even understand the word surrender and acceptance. And you can think of acceptance as an easier way to think about surrender, but in the end, it's really about surrendering. Because if you don't give yourself up to the reality of the situation, you cannot open yourself up to the possibilities that the present presents for itself. So I think it's one of the things that we as leaders need to give up, this need to be in control and accept the circumstances, surrender to the circumstances so that we can take the next best action that's needed for us to be successful as leaders. So that's what I have for today. I encourage you to think about this some more. Would love to hear more about this. If you have additional thoughts, reach out and contact me through all the usual channels. And next week, I'm going to be talking about psychological safety. This is a big area right now. My company, PA Consulting, has done some research. I'll be sharing some of that around how to actively build psychological safety. There's a lot of work around this. It's a key area around inclusion and belonging. But I think more importantly, it's a really important thing to understand if you are going to try to create the most collaborative, innovative, disruptive, exponentially growing company that you can. So join me next week about how we can actively create psychological safety for our teams, for our organization, and for the larger ecosystem in which we work. Until then, take care. Good luck in accepting things as they are in your practice of radical acceptance and surrender. And I'll talk to you next week. Thanks.